Bismillah wa salatu wa salam. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to a bonus episode of the Middle West podcast. Offline, Asad was just getting told how his career prospects are completely rubbish because he doesn't speak Arabic. I'm your host, Taqib Musa. I'm joined by my co-host with no career prospects, Asad Hussein. And we're joined...
Assalamu
alaikum. And we're joined by a guest joining us through... chat, so we're using the internet for our call instead of old school GSM. Ibrahim Olabi, assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you very much for joining us, especially since you're carrying your kid on your arm, mashallah. So that's some hardcore dedication.
Pleasure.
Ibrahim is
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, really appreciate it. Ibrahim's joining us on this bonus episode because he set up the Syrian Legal Development Program when he was a student. He's a solicitor by trade, which is different to being a
barrister.
He's a barrister.
I was
a big difference between a solicitor and a barrister.
I was literally going to ask that. I was going to say you're a solicitor and it's a different to a barrister, but apparently you're a barrister and that's not a solicitor.
Yep.
So when we start, please, if you could please educate me, what's the difference between a solicitor and a barrister?
So in simple terms, the barrister is the one that goes to court and advocates in court, while the solicitor interacts with the client. So my clients are usually solicitors that bring forward a case, and I'm supposed to advise on evidence and then raise the matter in front of the judge and cross-examine witnesses and things like that. That's simply put. So
would you say that yours is the cooler job?
I think every barrister would say that, but I think it's a complementary. It's a complementary role. It's a split profession in the UK, and it actually depends on what sort of character you have. If you want your fancy office and interacting with people and doing a desk job, if that's what you enjoy, then a solicitor is a better career. If you're as talkative as I am and argumentative as I am, then a barrister is the one to go for. So it really depends on the personality, and it's both roles complement each other.
Okay, that's a very, very diplomatic answer. So basically, what you're trying to do is not discourage any clients by pissing them off from now.
Absolutely.
Okay. And I read that you work at International Justice Chambers.
Yeah, it's called Guernica. So as barristers, we're self-employed through chambers, and almost each barrister belongs to a chamber if they're not employed. And yes, my chambers is called Guernica 37, referring to the city in Spain that was bombed in World War II, and it's chambers that works on international justice. So I'm doing that while running SLDP on the side.
So is that like a very international job or London-based or?
So it's more international. So the chambers does a lot of work in the Middle East and internationally on international crime. Egypt, Palestine, Libya, but then also does work in Colombia and other countries. I focus more on the Syria work within chambers, which also goes hand in hand with, SLDP and the organization that I run. So it kind of goes smoothly together.
So what sort of judges are you presenting in front of and that kind of thing?
So when I do domestic courts, it's usually magistrates. So I'm still quite junior in the barrister route. It's usually just what we call a knockabout crime, if you like. So it's a district judge or magistrates.
Okay, and this is basically your standard British. Well, I don't know. When I say standard, I don't really know what I'm talking about. But it's basically where a minor crime has occurred. And you're representing someone who, for example, got assaulted.
I'm usually on the defense, so I'm usually defending those who are accused of doing something. But yes, that's usually the case.
Okay, I mean we can go down a whole wormhole on this, but I do know that today we have a bit of a topic in mind, so I'm going to try and. I don't tend to stick to topic, but today I'll try to. So Syrian Legal Development Program. Now, I think you started this up when you were a student at Manchester University. So how did you go about creating an organization when you're still a student, and what exactly do you guys do?
Sure. So as you know, I'm originally Syrian, and when the Syrian uprising started in 2011, I found myself during my degree, because I started uni at 2011 as well. So I went down to Syria during the summer breaks, and I used to, because I also speak German, try to report what's happening in Syria in German, Arabic, and English. Then that, because being in an armed conflict, introduced me to a lot of the combatants on the ground, because, a lot of journalists like to get as close as they can to the front line. I went back to the UK and I studied the laws of armed conflict at the University of Manchester, international law. That was in my second year. And then I said, wait a second, I'm learning the laws of conflict. There is a conflict in my home country. These laws are directed towards combatants. I have access to these combatants. So let me start and, try and advocate for compliance with these humanitarian norms in Syria. And I went down and I did these kind of advocacy engagements on or near the front lines. And then I came back and I saw an opportunity to set up an organization that does international law related work on Syria. Fast forward a couple of years, 6 years now, actually. It's crazy how time flies. We're an organization made up of 12 people, mainly in the UK, but also in different countries. We work on two issues. One is kind of capacitating and coaching other Syrian organizations and human rights defenders and activists on
did you
technical
say
international
capacitating?
As in building their capacity.
Wow,
is that a word?
That's a very barrister. Well, it is now because you're a barrister and you used it. So
I don't know if I might be translating from Arabic or German, so I don't know if it is even a word. But basically, building their capacity on international law matters that is related to their work. So things related to explaining the legality of chemical weapons or forced displacement, helping them draft witness statements for torture victims. And the other thing that we do is business and human rights. So we go after businesses and businessmen who kind of are complicit in financing crimes, and we try to kind of engage with sanctioning committees in the UK and the US to get these people listed. And alhamdulillah, through the last 6 years, we have received funding from a lot of governments that are in line and supportive of the work that we do. That includes Switzerland, the Netherlands, Denmark, and hopefully, inshallah, a few other countries as well as we grow.
I think one of the things you mentioned was advocacy work. So what does this actually involve? So you go out there, you're speaking to people who are, I guess, fighters on the ground, and that makes it sound very, I guess the only people who are listening to you are people who are interested in not doing anything to civilians, right? Because you're advocating how exactly do you conduct yourselves in conflict in a manner where you don't commit a war crime.
Exactly. But, people listen to you for different reasons. Some people have the interests of civilian genuinely at heart. Others, have reputational interests. Some groups don't want to be listed as, criminal organizations. Some don't want to be prosecuted if they go to Europe. So people listen to you for different reasons. But you don't know. But that was 6 years ago.
Any of the loony organizations that we have all heard of, like ISIS would never come to you and say, "Oh, give us some training."
Of course not. Of course not.
So
all organizations which are kind of extreme or proscribed don't seek an interest in any sort of international law anyways.
Why would another group be... Because I guess my fundamental question is, how can you commit a war crime by mistake? Like, surely you'd realize you were committing a war crime when you did it.
Not really. So, for example, the age of the child within international law, right? So if you did not know what legally qualifies as a child and you thought, this person is 13 or 14 and he's the size of an adult, then that's fine. Or, for example, if you thought...
recruit them as a soldier and you didn't realize that this is against the law.
For example, if you do not know, what sort of precautions you should take when you're firing a weapon, and you should, tell civilians and try and give as much warning as you can. If you thought that in order to get evidence out, some sort of torture is permissible. In war, yes, it's easy for us, sitting here in the UK saying, why would you commit a war crime? Or it's not easy to commit a war crime through a mistake. And you're right, these are goes against our fundamental human instincts. But in a war, you really can't keep tabs of that, and you need to constantly remind people, particularly, for example, things that you do after you execute a combatant or a belligerent combatant. People take pictures with their bodies or stuff along these lines, which we kind of advocate against. But that kind of advocacy was 6 years ago towards combatants. Now most of our advocacy is towards policymakers, foreign secretaries, governments on issues like detention and sanctions and wider issues related to the Syrian conflict.
So So what would so you'd be advising, for example, what the Iraqi government now on various?
No, so our focus is on Syria. First of all, Syria is in the name Thaqib.
Yes.
And so we so what we do is we engage with government. Sorry,
this is trying to.
So you said this is lighthearted, so
it's a bit stupid of me, to be fair.
So we work specifically on the Syrian situation. Obviously, the Syrian government, being the main perpetrator of war crimes in Syria, is beyond any sort of engagement. But what we do is, for example, at the moment, one big topic that we work on, advocacy, is telling European countries that Syria is not safe for them to return refugees to Syria, by highlighting the kind of ongoing detention, forced conscription to the army, things like that. Because, returning someone to an area where they could be tortured is against the Torture Convention, which a lot of European countries are part of. So that kind of work. Or when some people say, Syria is ready for reconstruction, we're post-war, we advocate that no, it's not yet there. If you put money into reconstruction, the money is going to go into the wrong hands. You're fueling the conflict again, and we provide evidence and legal arguments for that.
Okay, and essentially, you're telling these governments who are trying to do the right thing where exactly they can put their money. I think you mentioned some businesses as well. So basically, businesses that are trying to get back into business in Syria through mining or whatever, and you're kind of helping to make sure that they don't get involved, or showing to them that the actions they'd be getting involved in would be illegal.
Absolutely. Or there's a human rights impact of their work. So, for example, if you're a reconstruction company and you're going to reconstruct an area where people have been forcibly displaced from and are not able to come back, then you're contributing to forced displacement. If your business partner, your local Syrian business partner, you don't do enough due diligence, and then this local Syrian business partner is a war criminal or financed a lot of war crimes, then you're also financing a more crime. So it's these kind of engagements that we have with the relevant stakeholders.
Okay, and is there actually, I don't know if you're at liberty to discuss this, but are there any big names that you stopped? Was there a big company that Google was trying to get back into Syria and you stopped them, or?
Well, at the moment, the Western interest itself from companies is still very low. So we have the companies we've engaged with they've had interest, not saying no, we're going in tomorrow. And the reason the interest is low is because there's a lot of US and UK sanctions on Syria. And so these companies would not risk, unless Syria is their only market, where otherwise they would go out of business, and they're willing to, bypass all these sanctions and find ways to evade them and circumvent them. Then, they're already beyond our engagement. But because already there's a lot of difficulties with banks and European and US governments making it difficult already for investment, our focus has been more with the countries, less so with the businesses. But we do get the occasional business that says, hey, we've heard Syria needs, reconstruction for 300 billion as per the World Bank. Could you let us know what the situation is? And then we explain it, and then usually they're deterred. But it's not as easy decision to make that, because again, the people in Syria are still, our families and friends, and we do want it to be reconstructed, and we do want businesses to flourish. And so it's also very difficult morally to say we don't want businesses to go in. And therefore, what we say is that we don't want businesses to go in these conditions, because they will be contributing to the conflict, making it, worse and worse.
I guess there's a lot of companies so I'm assuming most Russian businesses, for example, who are comfortable operating there, they don't really care or listen to you. So how much authority do you have to force a business who doesn't really want to listen to you? So they're like, I don't really care. Yeah, I'm going to go in and do this thing, even though it's going to contribute to the war. And are you guys able to do anything to stop that, or?
You're absolutely right. There are a lot of Russian companies, there are a lot of Iranian companies in Syria, but these companies are waiting for funds, and Russia and Iran are broke, right? And so the money will have to come from the West. And that's why Putin was jet setting in Europe, telling people, if you pay for reconstruction, which basically means that the money would go to his companies, then Syrians will return. And that's one point that we make, is that the return of Syrians is not linked to how economically developed it is, because they did not flee an economic situation. They're not migrants. They fled persecution. So we're countering all the Russian and Iranian initiatives saying, no, it's fine, give us the money, we'll rebuild it, by saying, no, that's way too premature at the moment.
Okay, and I guess that means that you might have some you might get a little bit of blowback from I guess companies or regimes even. So you're not going to you didn't go to the Russian World Cup, I take it, nor could you.
No, actually, I actually boycotted it, and we called for its boycott really, because it was just, it was a way of whitewash Russia's crimes.
Okay, that's quite interesting. So I guess this is...
Who did you support in the World Cup, Stefan?
Obviously, I supported Saudi Arabia before they lost, which was a very interesting match. No, I supported England, actually. For the first time, I had a team I could support, because obviously I can't support Pakistan, and Saudi Arabia just loses. So I supported England for a change, which was very exciting. And
okay. Sure it was. But I feel like even the UK did not send... Remember, because that was when Skripal got poisoned, right? And the UK did not send a full delegation.
The Salisbury
I
thing.
think they boycotted. Exactly. They even boycotted it. So football, is not beyond politics.
Right. I guess this is... So let's get deeper into the geopolitics of the region and come to the current events. Asad, feel free to cut in at any time. I think Asad is just kind of taking a little break for this. He usually comes in...
No, I'm enjoying... I'm enjoying the conversation
with your popcorn. So what we've seen recently, so in the past week, and just we're recording on the 6th of January, and we'll be releasing ASAP. We tend not to release so soon. We try to wait for the conversation to kind of or the news story to develop completely, so that we can come out of there sounding smart. But I think this is important, and also we only have you for some time before you have to travel. So this Qasem Soleimani thing, right? I think from a Syrian perspective, you've been on the ground working with people in Syria for some time, and one of the key things he's kind of been involved with is propping up the Assad regime. A lot of it has been attacking civilians indiscriminately. What do you what were your first thoughts when you woke up on, was it the 2nd of January, I believe, when the news came out that the Americans have taken him out on a strike?
Well, mixed emotions. Let's put it that way. Of course, as you said, as a Syrian who was in Aleppo, and I've actually listened firsthand on the radio when sometimes when you're having, because there's no communication in Syria that works perfectly well during a conflict, and so we all had walkie-talkies, and sometimes the walkie-talkies jam, right? And I remember personally my walkie-talkie signal jamming with another one, and I was hearing Persian on the walkie-talkie at a time where Aleppo was being bombed recklessly and indiscriminately. So as a Syrian who has seen firsthand the brutality of the Iranian militias led by Qasem Soleimani, I felt, happy that he's no longer with us, that he was gone, irrespective of how this was done and the legal questions surrounding it, all of that. I'm happy that this person is no longer there. Would I have been happier if he was, standing trial and exposed and his victims were able to confront him? Of course, but I'm also not naive to know that this is, a possibility with the kind of impunity that he had and the backing of a lot of states, including Russia and Iran. And so it was also joyful kind of to see, because through my Syrian work, I work with a lot of victims, a lot of torture survivors, a lot of detention survivors, a lot of civilians who were forced to displaced from Eastern Ghouta, from Aleppo, where Iran and the Quds Brigade played a massive role. And seeing them on social media celebrating this, people were handing over sweets to each other, inside Syria, celebrating his death. I know this is not full justice, and that's not how justice usually looks like. But these are the victims, and these are the people who suffered directly, and they were celebrating. So there was, a part joy in that, seeing them, that they feel some sort of justice.
But do you think it's fair for them to feel like that? Because now Iran is going to come back with a greater vengeance. So yeah, this guy's gone, but they've already replaced him with someone who might even be more brutal, and there's a likelihood to be attacks on American targets, which means the Americans are going to respond with harsher attacks, sanctions, things like that. And I mean, ultimately, isn't this whole thing going to make everything worse?
It might be. We don't know. It is a possibility, but you can't ask a Syrian who's seen so much death and so much destruction to think what could be worse. Someone who lost his dad, his mother got raped, lost his house, was forcibly displaced, became a refugee, unable to return. He would celebrate the death of someone that contributed to that. What comes out of it and the consequences of that is yet to be seen. But for the moment, there was joy, and that's human nature. We can't keep predicting what could be worse than that, or what could be better. It's not in our human nature to do that, to think about these things logically.
I guess bringing this back to the West, one of the things that we've seen, this is the second time that Trump has done something that we kind of, or you could say a lot of people were advocating. Let me qualify that, which is when Trump attacked Syrian air bases. I think this was about 6 months to a year ago, when they fired cruise missiles at Syrian government air bases. It was the first time in a number of years that, because since the Obama era, after the red line was crossed with sarin gas fired used on civilians, and Obama said we're going to do this and that, and then nothing happened. Whereas we saw very positive action from Trump, and a lot of people were celebrating that as well. But it turned out to be nothing, because actually it turns out they radioed the Russians to tell them to get out of there, and they just targeted the random airfield, and only like one plane blew up. So
yeah, the airfields were empty, weren't they? A lot of them.
So do you think this is more of it's just a symbolic kind of attack where it doesn't actually mean anything, but it gets Trump a lot of brownie points because he comes out looking stronger, and a lot of these Muslims just go out thinking, yay.
Well, first of all, if a lot of Muslims are going out saying yay, that would have been a different reaction, because unfortunately they're not. Right, and there's a huge split amongst the Muslims and also the left on that. I mean, Ismail Haniyeh, the leader of Hamas, was in Tehran today and yesterday, calling him the martyr of Jerusalem. So I'll get to that in a moment. But actually, coincidentally, when the 2013 vote was happening in the House of Commons, I was in Aleppo during that day, and I remember turning off all electrical appliances at home with a couple of friends of mine to power a small television to watch how Ed Miliband, just purely on party politics, stopped the chemical or the attack to the chemical attack in 2013, which then led to so many other chemical attacks.
This is when Cameron said we're going to back you, Obama, and then he took it to Parliament, exactly. And Parliament said no, we're not going to strike Assad. We're just going to sit this one out.
Exactly, and Cameron didn't have to take it to Parliament. And actually, I'm reading his book at the moment, and I didn't get to the Syria bit yet, but he mentions Syria a couple of times, and he mentions it as a regret in the way that he dealt with it. But then again, also when Khan Sheikhoun happened in 2017, the other chemical attack, I was also there. This time, really near where the attack took place, and I remember waking up one morning with a friend of mine where, I was sleeping at his house, and he woke me up and he's like, Trump bombed. And I remember being so confused, like, Trump bombed who, what's happening?
Oh, so this is the airstrike situation where he...
Exactly. Okay. So we went out on the streets because we didn't have enough internet to figure out what's happening. But all what was happening is that people were out on the streets, again, giving us sweets and giving us, coffee. And because I wanted to hear what ordinary Syrians think, I just went to a coffee shop that day where they had the TV on, and everyone was talking about obviously the strike. And I know eavesdropping is not a socially acceptable thing, but in that context, let's say it's just to get to
you're a journalist, you're allowed to eavesdrop,
get a feel of the sense. And a lot of them were saying, yeah, we know this is symbolic. We know nothing is going to come out of it. We know Trump is not doing it for us. We know it's about the elections. We know he's doing it just to go against what Obama has done. We know all of this, but we're still happy. We're still happy because there was some sort of accountability, precision strike, zero collateral damage against the military target in response to a violation of international law, right? And what comes out of it, we don't really know, but at least it's some sort of accountability. Is it the kind of accountability we would like to see ideally? No, but we don't live in a utopian state.
So I guess this comes down to the other thing is that I think you mentioned there violation of international law. And I think one of the questions that people have is that why is it that it's like wasn't the attack, so it was a response to a breaking of international law, but the attack on itself was a breaking of international law as well, right? And this is why I think some people feel very disenfranchised with the whole kind of global community, and in fact primarily the West as guardians of this, or the UN, because it's just, it's or a lot of these global kind of legal, international humanitarian law, etc. organizations, because they just say it's selectively applied. It doesn't apply when America breaks an international law or the UK breaks an international law. So why should we even kind of take breaking?
I think it's more so to do with the power of these organizations to kind of effectively bring them to account. There have been examples in the past where people have tried to bring America to account for breaking international law. Numerous cases, Iraq for one example, Nicaragua is another example. I'm sure Ibrahim knows, but I think essentially it boils down to the hegemonies that exist within the current structures in international law. And some people, like you said, do become disenfranchised with working in such systems, so they tend to work outside of these systems. And this is when we get to these places where we have rebel militias, etc., etc., etc. So I don't think labeling people who don't really see international law as a solution, as being people we shouldn't follow, is a good thing. So Ibrahim he's the director of the Syrian Legal Development Program. And you work, if I'm right, you work mainly to do in international law. Am I? Is that right? International law. Right. Okay. Now, if you were to take on an issue or tackle an issue which was directly concerning the actions of a permanent member state of the Security Council, for example, would you see much resolve from your work? That's the question a lot of people ask. It's kind of a cliche that everyone says America rules the world, America's king. Nothing happens to them. But at the end of the day, when people are tirelessly working with organizations that try to bring America to account, we have to ask the question of whether it's worth it or not. Are we wasting our time? Does the international legal system have to be reformed some way?
Well, absolutely. Well, first of all, there's a few things that I think we need to make clear. One, international law is made by states, right? It's states that make it, and no state would be part of a treaty or part of a legal system that does not serve its interests. So we have to be clear. This is not a divine set of laws. These are laws that are made by nation states. That's the first thing. The second thing is that international law, as you know, does not have any sort of enforceability mechanisms. It's states that create it, states that interpret it, and states that enforce it. And so if you do not have the political will to hold a country to account by other countries and appeal to their interests, whatever their interests might be, to assist you in holding this other rogue state to account, then you will not get anywhere, because you need a state to kind of say, no, I will enforce that, or I will take this forward, or I will do this or that. We've seen that with the arrest warrants against Omar al-Bashir, for example, when he went to Jordan, went to South Africa, he wasn't arrested. So if these states are not complying with their legal obligations, there are repercussions in international relations, such as sanctions, a loss of reputation, trust, business. There's a lot of things that could happen that a state needs to take into consideration before they breach that. Obviously, the more powerful the state, the more difficult is to hold it to account. But nevertheless, this is a tool. International law is a tool. It's a language. It is something that we have at the moment that we need to work with. And where it's not working, we need to kind of keep pushing against it and calling for reform. But calling for reform requires states to back that reform. Otherwise, you're not going to get anywhere. So those who kind of try to go outside of the state system it does not work. You need states to come forward and say, no, we want to reform this, we want to do that, we want to do this, and then have enough power to be able to change the kind of status quo. But is it effective in some occasions? You have to pick your battle. Of course it is. You can push for certain accountability, try to get cases. Now look at Gambia, bringing the case in front of the International Criminal Court against international courts of justice against Myanmar and what they're doing in the Rohingya. We have the International Criminal Court accepting jurisdiction. But again, questions of international justice, within the international community, we need to look at them very differently than what we do on a domestic level. Because, you kill one person, you might end up in prison for life, or, where countries where there is capital punishment, you might get killed. But if you kill 100,000, if you kill 1 million, what sort of punishment exists for that? And as one saying goes, you kill one person, you might end up in prison. You kill 100,000 and you end up in Geneva in a peace conference. That's the kind of situation that we're living in. But that's the reality. There's nothing much we can do about that other than advocate, push, understand the system, call for its reform, pick our battles, pick our allies, and try to push for the best that we can. And I think even Islamically, I also look at it from the perspective that we're not going to be asked about the end results. We're going to be asked about what we have done towards that. I will not be asked, what happened to Syria or what happened to Sudan or what happened to Libya. I am nothing in that equation. But I need to do what I can do with the privileges that I have, with the responsibilities that I have towards that end goal. Whether I reach it or not, that's a different story.
I guess that's sorry, go on.
No, you can go ahead. Go ahead.
I was going to ask about kind of a historical context on this, and do you think that with Serbia, for example, Serbian genocide, and I guess the international community were able to bring a lot of these people to justice, and over the past kind of 50, 60 years, or even the past century or two, do you think things have gotten significantly better, and can you kind of pinpoint cases where actually international advocacy work has really been successful? We've actually been able to bring people to justice through these kind of systems of the International Criminal Court and The Hague and those type of things. And so do you envision that, 20 years from now, or hopefully sooner than that, hopefully 5 years from now, that we'll be able to bring a lot of these kind of modern day criminals to light, and actually some of them will meet as you said, the ideal kind of bringing to justice that we really want?
Well, we need to remember that the entire international criminal system is new, right? It's post-World War II. The amount of courts that we had, the Yugoslavian court, the Rwandan courts, are all kind of innovative ideas that are new. And yes, they were able to prosecute people, and yes, they were able to put some of the worst criminals behind bars. But these cases, as you said, took years and took time and took political will. And some people say that is type of justice, but others say, that is not justice for them to be in a 5-star prison somewhere. And, that there's still debates on that. And it's important to listen to victims in these debates. Whether I envision that we can get the modern day criminals to justice, I hope so. And it depends on what we do with that. If we sit back and, just say, oh, there's nothing that we can do, these are all powerful states, and whatever we do is not going to even matter, then no. But if we could try and push as much as we can, then yes, I am hopeful.
So I want to make a point here, if you allow me to. The point is, responding to Thaqib, we'd like to hope that in the future we'd be able to bring more justice into the world through international law or through domestic law, whatever. But I think one of the fundamental issues that we're not addressing is the power dynamics in international politics. For example, how vetoes work, how swing works in the General Assembly in the votes. For example, if one of the major players in the world has a problem with one of the proposals that is being brought to the Security Council by the General Assembly, for example, or resolution, for example, then effectively, if it is against their wishes, they will push it aside, and it's the ease to which they push it aside with is the problem. That is the main problem. if we can't address these problems, for example, the Syrian problem, we have one side that is being backed by one major player in the world, Russia, and another side that is being backed, well, has been backed by another major player in the world, America. You will see
Do you think
a
that's a fair
complete.
statement, though? Do you think it's a fair statement that the rebels have actually been backed by the Americans? Because I feel
No, to some extent, but you have to understand when I'm making the point about America and Russia, it's not really to do with the people on the ground. I don't think Russian politicians and American politicians really have the interests of the Syrian people in mind when they make the decisions. It's mostly to do with competitivism. So we see it's just a reenactment of the Cold War.
What's happening?
America
You guys
just yeah,
making up words. Competitivism.
yeah, but basically yes, we're allowed to do that. We got 2 degrees, but we what we see is literally a reenactment of the Cold War, where one side does something and the other side does the complete opposite, and it's like a ping pong effect that we see. And unless, I say again, the system is reformed. Now, when I say reform, I don't mean we're moving outside of the idea that we involve states in the reform. Like Ibrahim said, states are international law. Without international law, without states, there is no international law, because these are the entities that are governed by such a mechanism. But when we talk about reform, we're talking about the powers that such countries have and the extent of these powers. Accountability is a big one. And when you have countries that can avoid accountability with the simple raise of a hand, then that becomes a problem. And especially in the Syria situation or any other situation, like you said, is there a hope of seeing in the future more justice or more people being brought to account? Then yes, there is 100%. Like you mentioned, Ibrahim, where the Gambia is taking Myanmar, the government, to the international courts for what they're doing in their country against the Rohingya population. But that's an issue that is neutral with the major powers. The major powers being the permanent members. But if we tackle issues which involve the interests of these permanent members, then you'll see a completely different situation.
Absolutely.
Most cases, what you'll see is if a war or a conflict does involve one of these members, then it will drag on for decades, if not longer.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I fully agree with you, and it's we need to understand, as we've all said, the power dynamics that comes with that, and appeals to countries' interests, and see what we could do with them. Yes, some countries care about human rights, but others have other interests, and then as we see how these interests kind of come together or where they intersect, and then make each country or each state or each advocate or lobby or organization tries to kind of get the most out of it. But yes, just calling for reform and calling out international law on certain things does not really get us to where we need to.
So does the SLDP do any kind of activism in terms of legal activism, or is it just mainly to do with actual legal issues?
Well, unfortunately, we hadn't had the kind of opportunity to really look beyond the legal system as it is now, because of we're dealing with kind of breaches, very grave breaches of international law. And for the Syrian case, Assad, the laws exist. It's not a matter of that torture is permissible. It's not a matter of that chemical weapons are okay. The laws on paper are there, but they're being breached. So most of our activism is to kind of enforce these laws rather than ask them to ask for these laws to be written in the first place. We do some of that kind of legal activism, if you like, when it comes to trying to get a state to adopt an interpretation of international law that is victim-based and not like kind of state-based. So do they need, for example, the Syrian government consent to deliver aid across the Syrian border where, the government does not control that border, for example, without a Security Council resolution? So there we kind of, put our legal hats on and we, adopt an interpretation of international law that says you can, and then we take it to states and say why they need to adopt that interpretation. Stuff like that.
So with what's happened recently with the bombings in Iraq and the death of Soleimani, you, as someone who's worked on the ground in Syria and continues to do so, what kind of change will you expect to see on the ground in Syria, working we're working as part of the SLDP and with the people we work with?
What I think would happen is that, Iran will slightly calm down in Syria for a bit. I think they'll be very confused as to how to go forward. What is it that needs to be done? They need to rearrange their ranks, and that's why Ali Mamlouk, the head of the military intelligence, I think he is now in Syria, or his very senior intelligence figure, was in Tehran yesterday. This flew immediately from Damascus to Tehran, and rumor has it that even when Soleimani was killed outside the airport, he was coming from Damascus, right? So there is a lot of, I think now they need to kind of re-strategize what they need to do there in Syria, and I think in any case they will be a little bit, calmer in their presence.
I guess
would that be to your benefit?
Sorry?
Would that be to the SLDP's benefit?
Well, we don't. I mean, again, their presence or not, it doesn't really matter to us. What really care about is the kind of crimes that these militias are kind of committing. And obviously, if Iran's committed a lot of crimes, and so if they kind of calm down a little bit, then that would be a good thing for civilians. So SLDP's benefit is when civilians that we serve benefit. It's not. We don't have a benefit ourselves. But obviously, as we try to kind of hold perpetrators to account, if these perpetrators give people a break, then that's always a good thing.
I had one of the questions from a UK perspective. So a lot of people are saying that this is basically between the US and Iran, and we shouldn't get involved in this. And it's interesting because you talked about the previous kind of in 2013 when David Cameron brought this to brought this to the Parliament. Whether or not he should bomb Assad, Parliament went against it. It was close, it was marginal, but ultimately, and I think ultimately, as you said, it was a little bit partisan. When 3 years down the line, I believe it was 2016, when it was brought again by Theresa May this time that we should bomb ISIS in Syria, it passed through the Parliament with flying colours because they were already doing it in Iraq, and actually we've seen the effects of that where some Allied airstrikes have actually hit civilian targets. There's a case reported where it actually hit a mosque. And the Allies denied it for some time. NATO denied it for some time, and then actually the evidence was overwhelming, and they said, "Look, we made a mistake. We made a tactical we didn't realize what we were doing. We hit them by mistake. Collateral damage." What is your position now? Do you think that because America's it seems they're gonna escalate this further, and based on what we've seen so far, what we've seen in the past year with the British kind of Navy in Gibraltar seizing an Iranian ship, and then the Iranians seizing two ships, with the American escalation happening right now, and Iran has now said we're completely pulling out of the nuclear deal, so we're going to start hardcore enrichment. Trump, I think, tweeted, he said, we've got 52 targets lined up. We'll bomb you guys again if you guys do anything. Where do you think Britain lies in all this? Because our leadership seems to say we are 100% on the American side.
Well, he's responded, doesn't he, Johnson? He said the only thing he's said against Trump's statements is that we shouldn't be bombing cultural sites because they're protected by UNESCO. And other than that, go ahead.
So don't bomb the cultural
That's what
sites.
it pretty much seems. Don't bomb the cultural sites. On the list of 52, just cross out the cultural sites and the rest have on it.
It's very frustrating because when ISIS hit Palmyra in Syria, everyone like kicked up a fuss. So these guys have been killing innocent civilians for like the past 6 months, and nobody batted an eyelid. But sorry, anyways, back to the question. What do you think about this? What do you think the UK's position should be / will be?
The UK needs to realize that it does not operate in isolation, in the sense that when Iran breaks international laws in Syria or Russia breaks international laws in Syria, that is a message not to the Syrians themselves. Maybe part of that message is to the Syrians, but the majority of that message is they're going to the international community to say, hey, I can break laws that you, the UK, are part of, like the Geneva Conventions and whatnot, and I can get away with it. I can do all those sorts of things, and I can, and there's nothing you can do about it. And the whole EU sanctions on oil, for example, is a clear example of that. Iran, had its tanker being sent to Assad, and that money is being used to commit crimes in Syria, and still, bypass sanctions. And then when they got stopped and they gave assurances that, no, the money will not be going to Syria, it did. Right, and in the end, in breach of EU sanctions. So the UK needs to know that it cannot be in isolation. It will have to take a stance. You cannot say this is just something between the US and Iran, because Iran has a project in the region. The West has a project in the region, and they're conflicting project, if you like, and therefore everything that Iran does affects the West, and everything that the West does affects Iran, and that's what we've seen recently. So you cannot just be a bystander in this.
Okay, so UK needs to get involved in some way. So how do you see this playing out for the UK? So do you think that, because what do you think the US is going to do? Is it just going to be further airstrikes, and is that what UK is going to get involved with, or do you think this could boil into like a 2003 level invasion of Iraq?
America's response has been mostly to do with calming the situation. It seems like they've killed Soleimani, and then they've got, all right, everyone, just calm down. The tyrant is dead. Let's just take a step back.
I personally don't think any of them would go into war. It would be very costly. I think sometimes you need to, in order for you to negotiate, you need to negotiate from a position of power. You cannot negotiate if you're weak, and I think what the US is doing is bombing, assassinating Soleimani, and then said, okay, let us sit now on the table and see what needs to be done. And that would bring Iran to the table, or might not be. I don't know. I really stopped predicting in this world, given that I work on Syria, and we've seen how unpredictable things have become. So I really don't know what is to come. I doubt Iran could, is looking for an all-out war. But who knows?
The new head of the Al-Quds Force tweeted, or he was tweeted to have said that people should be looking out for the dead bodies of Americans all over the Middle East. But then the next day they went on and hacked the library website, which is hardly, anything which aggressive, if you want to say. Yeah, a library. Like, of all the things you want to hack, a library you hack.
Hack Netflix, man. That will bring
exactly.
Showing your strength, isn't it?
Public to its knees.
That would infuriate the West.
Netflix and Twitter.
Absolutely. No, I don't know. I guess we have to wait and see.
Well, this has been really good, and to be honest, I have so many more questions that we could keep going. So hopefully, we'll have you on again for further conversations. We really appreciate your time.
Absolutely.
I think are you very active on Twitter? Do people follow you on Twitter?
I mean, I'm not very active, but if you want to follow me, my handle is Ibrahim Olabi, so quite simple. I'm not that active. I really should be, shouldn't I? Like, I think I'll get back to it at some point.
Yeah, and then there's Syrian Legal Development Project also has its own Twitter handle. Do people get involved? Is there are there any volunteering opportunities, or do you do any training for people or that kind of thing?
I mean, absolutely. We're always looking for people who have a legal background, preferably if they speak Arabic as well. That goes a long way. So we're always on the lookout for people who want to assist. And unfortunately, it's quite difficult. But if anyone wants to assist in any way, and we're always looking for volunteers and interns to assist us with our research. But obviously, if they do speak Arabic, then the task might be a little bit more interesting. We're always looking for help. We're a not-for-profit organization, and so we need everyone's support.
And you didn't quite put it there, but also I'm assuming you need people's money as well, or do you just look after?
No, actually, we don't. No, we don't take private funding. We go after the governments. It's it's for all sorts of admin purposes, really, and admin reasons. And actually, funnily enough, Fatima, when I know this is a bit of a tangent, but on human rights work, when you get private donations, usually people expect crazy immediate results, like you're handing over a food parcel to someone and feeding them, but that's not how the human rights world works. So my experience is easier to work with governments than to work with individual donors, because you can't that what you achieve is not really something that you can take a picture.
When you say work with the governments, do you mean with the British government as well?
No, so we're funded only by Swiss, the Dutch, and Norwegian. Nordic countries, Danes as well, Scandinavian. So no, we're not funded by the UK or the US. But that's what I mean. So accepting money from government, or applying for a grant from government, usually is easier. Because they understand that the human rights work and the justice work is not something that you could achieve and take a picture with a smiling child and send it over to them and say, hey, justice achieved. That's not how this world works.
I appreciate that kind of long-term mentality, because I think a lot of charities have lost that, and they tend to go after the kind of the quick bites, if you will.
Absolutely. Because their donors want that, because it's the private funders, because if you want to give money to
want to see results.
Absolutely.
That's what it comes down to.
Absolutely. But the big results are those that take years in preparation to get, and obviously they need to come together and complement each other. But obviously
mankind is impatient by nature, so I think what you're doing with the funding situation is possibly the better way to go down.
Yeah, so do I.
I think that's a very profound line to end on. I think I said just mankind is impatient in nature. Inna al-insan lafi khusr. So Jazakallah khair, I really appreciate it. We've talked about your Twitter handle. Our Twitter handle is @themiddlewestpc. You can email us at middlewestpc@gmail.com for ideas, feedback, comments, guest recommendations, etc. And you can listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, wherever you listen to podcasts. And yes, we look forward to another episode. Ibrahim, this has been absolutely great. Really appreciate your time. And thank you very much for the listeners. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.